This is going to be a short and sweet video about 5 ways to do design out of 60 ways that are in my course on design approaches. And I'm going to try to present each of the 5 ways in a very, very short, very simple, very accurate, very approachable way. Because if you sort of get these 5 ways as truly different ways to design anything, design chairs, design gigantic events, designs new businesses, design negotiations between parties, design fashions. If you get these as 5 really different ways toward the same end, then you'll begin to get a strong sense of what makes one approach to design, along what dimensions is one approach to design different than another approach to design. And that sense of the dimensions by which approaches to design differ from each other is a profound door to great design, found clearly only in the world's greatest designers. So let's look at one way. Spotting dimensions of difference. Now, you get fashion people, they go to public squares and plazas in Italy and London and New York, and they sit and they watch people go by and they observe street fashions. But what are they getting as they observe? And the tragic thing is you get McQueen sitting, and then you get some other people sitting, and then 6-9 months later when their line comes out, it's clear one person observes stuff 100,000 times more interesting than what the other person observed. And so what's going on in the mind of the observer in those street settings? Now, I really dislike this personally because I think inducing from what people actually wear now to what good fashion is an inductive fallacy, and binds you to conformism and helps you make good sales, but is really boring. It makes for boring designs. It's, customer in rather than imagination out. It's sort of the opposite of what Apple did with iPods and all that. But there's a thing called the dimensions of difference and spotting dimensions of difference in the history of evolution of a design field. Take people to the Art Institute, the Museum of Modern Art at Chicago's Museum of Modern Art, and run them through all the rooms in chronological order and have them spot along what dimensions is art differing from itself as you go from room to room. It's very well, and you can do it with just rooms because the rooms have themes and they are in chronological order, and you can walk through them in chronological order, and you can spot for each room what dimension of difference these things are different than the previous room and the previous room. Along what dimensions are these differences? So you go from the differences, you spot the differences between the rooms, then you ask along what abstract categories explain these dimensions of difference, explain these differences. And then you can use those dimensions of difference once you put them in order, whether chronological or otherwise, largest to smallest, radical to conservative, whatever. Once you put those dimensions of abstract difference in order, and there'll be fewer dimensions than there are actual differences because you'll have multiple differences along the same dimensions of difference. Once you put those dimensions, abstract dimensions, in order, you can interpolate between the two that have the biggest gap between them. And you can interpolate before the first one and after the last one and get 3 totally new dimensions never present in history before. And then specify a version of your entity on those 3 totally new in history dimensions and get a really radical design unlike anything history's produced. And yet fitting and completing that overall historical development of the field. This is called dimensions of difference design. It's probably the most common design method actually done in the world. I won't say more about it here. Number 2, designing by trait revaluation. Now, this is interesting because it's usually done by the world and environment and media for us. So that a trait in a design or an entity that we used to like, respect, value, and want, we no longer like, respect, value, and want. Not because of anything we've done. It's just the weightings, the heft of value in that trait has changed relative to the heft on another trait. And we now want another trait. It's sort of like in digital camera development and design, more pixels, more pixels, more megapixels, more megapixels, more megapixels. That was the only dimension of distinction for many years until chip size, until the public got educated that small pixels, making more pixels by making the pixels smaller, increased noise. You weren't getting a better picture. The only mega-ing that counted was if the chip area was bigger, so that you had more pixels and bigger pixels. That counted. And now you find megapixels devalued as a trait, and size of pixels more valued as a trait, and it's generating a new category of camera like the Sony RX100 in the year 2012, which is priced terrifically at $600, $700. So that's redesigning by trait revaluation. Most of the time, the revaluations come to us from environment and media and are not invented by anybody. And it's just the first person who notices that the value, relative value and importance and heft of these traits is different than it was a year ago, 2 years ago. The first person to embody that subtle, nascent, incipient sense of difference gets the credit for changing the field's direction. The third design method is by designing by combinatorial explosion. Each new design thing, trait, whatever, characteristic, combines of all past traits of the object that was designed. Most of those combinations are useless, not interesting. A few of them will be interesting, and one or two of those few will be new innovations in a new trait. And so by carefully looking at any new trait relative to all the existing traits. So we take, for example, using the digital camera example, bigger pixels on a bigger chip as a new trait that was from trait revaluation. We devaluated just megapixels and started more highly evaluating, valuing bigger pixels on bigger chips. If that's the new trait, how does that combine with all the existing traits of the camera to make even further new traits in the camera? And the bigger pixels allow for less noise in a detailed image, which allows for breathtaking 3D views compared to smaller pixels trying to do of the same resolution, trying to do 3D pictures. And so bigger chips are a strong enabler for 3D that takes your breath away even in static photographs. And they go hand in hand. And now we have display mechanisms, 3D TVs to do. And so the change from megapixel to bigger pixels is enabling 3D to be more beautiful and impactful. That's designing 3D by combinatorial explosion of the bigger pixel thing combined with the need for detail in order to make depth appear to the eye and the brain. The fourth way to redesign is called competitive evolution of populations of random design seeds. You create random variations in existing designs as a population of alternatives, and you let them evolve and interact with each other, and you sort of manage a natural selection process among them until you get winner designs out of their combination. Unexpected designs emerge from these interactions. This happens a lot more than you would expect. It's where designers sort of immerse themselves in alternative universes and worlds and books and designers and designs, change neighborhoods, change nations, visiting professorship somewhere, what have you, take a tour around the world, and they immerse themselves in the population of these things and let them interact in their mind till a synthesis comes out. So this is not really a designer having a process like the Nigel Cross process and following it. This is a designer refusing a process and letting populations of alternatives flood them and interact among each other until something that the designer never would have thought of emerges. It requires patience. It requires tuning the interaction of many different alternative ideas and ways. It includes, requires interest in zillions of combinations that turn out to be not very interesting and worthless for the sake of a few that turn out to be breathtaking. The fifth way is by perfecting traits. This is perfectly executing a focused single trait till it thrills us. Now, it could be the LCD screen on a laptop, Apple MacBook Pro computer with this totally new, super high resolution screen. And anything rendered on the screen is so gorgeous, just ordinary photographs from digital cameras, that your brain gets confused about the value of the laptop. The price is not much different, but the screen is so breathtakingly gorgeous, there's no other screen like it around anywhere. And displaying your stuff where it looks that gorgeous is more fun than displaying your stuff where it looks less gorgeous, even though there's no real value proposition for the user other than, wow, look at that screen and look how everything looks on that screen. And so this is where the pure, narrow perfecting of one trait can catch the attention of an industry and dominate it for a while. Now, this is a narrow basis of victory because if you purified it and made it breathtaking, everybody can quickly copy that. So it doesn't last long. And then trying to, do a better version of the same is probably going to be incrementally better, not revolutionary better. So, you can't do it twice in a row. But you can do something else, which is to totally perfect a very different trait of the device. Like the keyboard shape. Let's look at these 5 now in summary. Spotting dimensions of difference and interpolating new dimensions of difference, and then making a product along the new dimensions. Revaluing traits, so that taking trait A, making it less important than it was in the past, taking trait B, making it central where it wasn't in the past. Number 3 is combinatorial explosion, taking any new trait, combining with all the past traits to make a new dimension of design. Number 4, competitive evolution of populations of interacting alternatives until something emerges that's better than anything you would have chosen deliberately or planned for. And then number 5, taking one trait and doing it so purely and so perfectly that it stands out, but this is a very narrow thing that can't be repeated and can't be done twice on the same trait. So you got to find a totally other dimension to perfect in the future.